Hello everybody. This week I have been confronting one of my automotive prejudices. For the last few days I have been living with a Range Rover. My reasons for not liking the Range Rover are many-fold. Living in the countryside as I do, they take up far too much space. They are frequently bought simply as a status symbol rather than for their actually impressive off-road capabilities. Most of the people that get them, I think, will probably be better off buying an S-Class or a 7 Series or something like that. And of course, I will always appreciate the irony of one person taking a 2.5 ton, 4.4 litre V8 diesel barge straight down Kensington High Street at 2 miles an hour just so they can pop down to Waitrose to buy some packaging-free cereal so they can help do their bit to save the planet. However, for all of my rhetoric, the Range Rover actually does have quite a few charms. In this age of bland, styleless Euro boxes, the Range Rover still stands out. You can look at it straight away and identify it. Yeah, that's partly because the styling hasn't really changed that dramatically in the last 50 years, but you could say exactly the same thing as a 911. Land Rover have been very smart with this car. They know what people like and they are sticking with it. There is no doubt some reason that they are so bleeding popular. What I find most infuriating about this car is that although it is indeed absolutely huge, it is also extremely easy to place on the road. Because the thing is basically a big shed, there are not really many curves here, and you can see all of the corners of the car, it's so easy to put it exactly where you want it to be, whether that's on the road or off it. And this is no doubt something that Land Rover think is very important because they kind of do the same thing with all of their cars. The reason I say this is infuriating is because it means that when I've encountered one of these coming the other way, they've had absolutely no excuse whatsoever for staying a good 2.5 feet clear of their curb. This car is also a very rare example of an engine and chassis which seem perfectly matched, and I really am quite surprised about that because the last JLR product that I drove was the XF Sport Brake, and that had the 3 litre diesel V6 in it, which you can also get in this, but it just did not work in that car and it was mostly a calibration issue. However, the Ford derived 4.4 litre V8 diesel in this provides just the right amount of shove. I've no doubt that the 5 litre supercharged V8 is hilarious and brilliant, but it'll also drink like a fish, and in reality this thing is quick enough. It certainly throws you forward when you ask it to, and it'll also return very impressive fuel economy. I'm currently averaging about 28, having driven around the countryside for a little bit, and on a run the other day I got 33 miles to the gallon, which for a huge thing of this size is genuinely impressive. In fact, it's exactly the same fuel economy that I got from the 2 litre 4-cylinder turbo petrol XE that I drove a few months ago. And everyone keeps telling me that downsizing works. No, it doesn't. Stop being silly. That engine is mated to the familiar 8-speed automatic gearbox. There are also some funky all-wheel drive things going on, like a 2-speed transfer case, and I'm sure all sorts of trick differentials, but honestly, I don't understand that world. I know that those things are there, and should you want to take this car off-road, I'm pretty sure it'll do quite well, but for me, those are somewhat irrelevant. I can't help but think whoever programs the auto box for the XF didn't go anywhere near this one because it does exactly what it should. The XF's problem was that it didn't seem to know it was attached to a nice torquey diesel. So you put your foot down and in most situations its first instinct is to change a load of gears, which a diesel just doesn't need to do. This one is much smarter. As long as you're doing about 1500 RPM or so, this will just let the engine do its thing. It'll allow the torque to just pull you towards the horizon and it moves in a very effortless fashion. The engine even sounds quite nice when making progress. It's really a lovely thing. It's got a proper V8 thrum to it. One of the cars that I am personally benchmarking this against is the Audi SQ7. Similar in size, although the Audi does have more seats. The Audi also has an engine with a lot more firepower, but it also has a criminal amount of lag. This doesn't, and I have to say that I think I prefer the engine and gearbox setup in this car. However, the Audi does ride somewhat better. The Range Rover is a very strange thing indeed. I mean, this car has an agility that is simply shocking for a vehicle of this size. I had absolutely zero expectations whatsoever for this car in terms of handling, but it's unbelievable. I mean, literally, it just darts around. That initial turn-in is absolutely pin sharp. Of course, the steering is generally fairly slow, which is what you want from a large, proper 4x4, but it's very impressive. However, there is a downside. When you're driving along a well-paved road, everything seems as it should. The car floats along beautifully, and it seems like a very comfortable thing. If you throw it a challenge, a manhole cover, a pothole, speed bump, anything like that, you find that there's a real hard edge to the suspension. It just can't cope with those sudden changes, and that's very disappointing. I mean, I've recently been driving a lot of McLarens, and those cars have something like that amount of suspension travel available to them, and they manage to do an awful lot with that little travel they have. This thing has loads more, and yet somehow it just doesn't manage to deliver the all-round comfort that I expect. Particularly disappointing when you know that this thing is designed for these exact roads. I'm driving along here and I can feel this road surface with an unnerving accuracy, and I just shouldn't be able to. I want a sense of disconnect between me and the surface. I want to feel like I'm just gliding over it. Otherwise, what's the point in having something so ruddy, big and tall? It defeats the point. The 21-inch alloys on this, I can't really even blame, because they've still got chunky tyres on them. As standard, this car would come with 20s, and maybe they are a little bit better, but I can't imagine that the effect is going to be transformative like it might on some other cars. It's certainly not a bad place to be, and if you want to know more about the interior and exterior, go and check out my Part 1 video. The main takeaway from that is the fact that I think that if you are going to buy one of these, you probably should go with at least the Vogue SE specification. On top of this one, it gives you some nice luxuries such as the 360-degree parking sensors, which are very handy in a car like this, soft closed doors and ventilated seats. You also get a nicer stereo and a different quality of leather. This isn't bad, but if you can get better for such a little outlay, $6.5 grand, then I really would. Bear in mind that McLaren will charge you about £4,000 just for the parking sensors, and it suddenly seems like actually fairly good value. Driving this, I cannot help but think about the reasoning for it being that little bit stiffer. I wonder if it's because back in the old days, if you drove a Range Rover quickly, you would simply flip it over. That's nothing Range Rover specific, that's just how all 4x4s were. And people now expect a level of performance from an SUV that really physics doesn't want to let you have. So in their quest to make sure that footballers aren't pulled out of fields on a weekly basis, they've stiffened the car up to make it handle, but by doing that, they've just taken away that luxurious edge from it. It's a little bit disappointing. I certainly wouldn't say that the ride is ruined, but it is just noticeably choppier than some of their rivals. I would say that the SQ7 rides better than this, and the Volvo XC90 I drove the other week I think does too. Interestingly, both of those cars are 7-seaters, or available as 7-seaters, and this is a strict 5-seater. If you want a 7-seater, you have to buy a Discovery. I must confess, the Land Rover lineup makes no sense to me whatsoever. I mean, they're all basically 4x4s, and I don't see why you can't just have little one, medium one, big one. I don't get it. I don't get it, but I'm not the target audience, so fine. Other things that annoy me, you can turn this display off, but you cannot turn the lower display off. It's just permanently there. It's in dark mode now, so it's not too distracting, but fine. The rotary gear selector down here, which appeared on JLR models a few years ago and I think is now being phased out, annoys me as well, because when you are moving from drive to reverse, which you'll be when you're maneuvering a lot, it's very easy just to go from drive to park. So you'll be doing your maneuver, you'll be go back, clump, and that's not great. You can specify these to about £180,000 if you go completely nuts, get the long wheelbase, SV autobiography and all that jazz. But the fact is that for about £105,000, I think you can get everything you really need from the Range Rover experience. Now, potential downsides, JLR do have a real stigma about them regarding reliability. The XE that I had, the entertainment system, froze on test, so it's clearly a reputation that they still, in some part, deserve. However, Everyone that I speak to does tell me that they are trying very, very hard to improve that, and I do believe it. This certainly feels like a very solid, well put together and premium product. Obviously, there is only so much testing I can do with a vehicle in a week, but so far it has given me absolutely no cause for concern whatsoever. I think for most people, the smaller Range Rover Sport would probably be the more appropriate car. And of course, if you do want to spend 105 grand on a luxury vehicle, you're going to get a hell of a lot more luxury for your 100 grand if you do go and buy something like an S-Class or so on. However, an S-Class simply isn't a statement in the way that a Range Rover is. This is a truly impressive vehicle. I mean, the sheer size of it, if you put it in off-road mode as well, and the thing lifts up, it's very impressive, very intimidating. It's pretty cool. There's a few little things I really don't like. The windscreen wipers at the front they're just too flimsy. There's tiny little things. That does remind me of the bad old days of the Defender. Like, I know the Defender is the sacred cow to so many people, but it's just a vehicle that I really, really don't love. In part because it is flimsy as heck. It's such a bad thing. I mean, I love having a car where you can just go and do this and just be like, yabba-dabba-dabba-dabba-da, do not care, but this has got road bias tyres on it, so you can get in trouble very, very quickly with it. But the thing just gets on with it, gets down the road. It's fine. It doesn't care. For a lot of people I know that do live in places like this, they will occasionally come out to a road that's far, far worse than this one, and they will genuinely need a vehicle like this if they want to get anywhere. For those who live in Kensington, you have no excuses. Please stop kidding yourselves. There are, in fact, a lot of places that I've been to in London where one physically could not take this car because it is too wide, too tall. Just not going to happen. In fact, there even is a little menu in here that tells you how wide and tall the car is, presumably if you come upon such a restriction. And I really cannot blame JLR for the fact that a lot of people want to buy these cars who simply don't need them. I suppose you could very easily make the argument that nobody needs a supercar, yet I really, really love those. Let's try this, shall we? Right, actually, that's quite a tough little bit. That does it really well. It did not care about that. I haven't even put it in any of its fancy modes or nothing, and there are plenty of fancy modes. It's quite a bit of fun there. I'd love to do a proper off-road day because I've done a couple in the past, and sometimes it is quite incredible what a standard one of these is actually capable of. Yes, if you want a rugged, practical off-road vehicle, that's just not what this car is about. This car is the point where practicality and luxury meet. And for that customer who needs it, it is very good. As a road car, the SQ7 is a little bit comfier. The Volvo XC90 is a lot cheaper. A Porsche Cayenne is probably going to give you more performance for your money and has a potentially even fancier badge. You can also get silly fast versions of the Porsche as well, and that again is going to be a much quicker, much better road car. But I don't think anything's quite going to equal the breadth of ability that the Range Rover has. On the most basic level too, I also actually just really enjoy driving it. Slightly choppy ride aside, it's a beautiful thing to throw down lane, mostly because it feels so inappropriate to do so, and yet somehow so right at the same time. It responds so well. The thing is actually quite involving. The brakes are perfect. They're not overly responsive when you're at road speeds, and they certainly will stop the car. It's got the right amount of power, the steering's weighted perfectly, and everything in here just seems to work. No, it's not the best, but it also doesn't feel the 8 years old that it is. So props to JLR for keeping it going as long as it has without it feeling old. But I guess that is the benefit, much like the 911, of having an iconic and simple recipe that you stick to. Those things never get old. So, after living with a Range Rover for a week, what does this old cynic think? That'll do, pig. That'll do.